Hello and welcome. I'm Alexander Collins of Erudite Videos. Today we're doing a video on the anti-CRT legislation. What does it really say? Now, I'm just going to go right into it. I hate long intros. So, I have a nice simple quiz so you can tell whether you should even watch this video or not. Let's see. Question 1. Do the anti-CRT bills and statutes prohibit the teaching of any historical event or figure in any way, shape, or form? No. Do any of the quote-unquote anti-CRT bills prohibit teaching topics that make a white person feel bad, as widely reported by the Associated Press and blindly repeated by like every news outlet out there? Absolutely not. And we'll take a look at this. Do the anti-CRT bills clearly prohibit the teaching of CRT? No. Surprised? Confused? Not sure what I'm saying is correct? Well, you don't have to take my word for it, because we're going to do something really, really crazy. We're going to read the bill's actual text. Something the media totally did not do. And you'll quickly discover it doesn't take an attorney like myself to realize that what the media says is in these bills versus what really is in these bills are two entirely different things. Now, before we just jump into the reading these bills and statutes, let me just give you a little context so you understand where some of this came from. Because certainly the media didn't cover it because it doesn't fit their narrative. All right. First thing I want to go over is the Gabrielle Clark case. Who's Gabrielle Clark? Well, her son got dinged on an assignment because he wouldn't admit that he was an oppressor. Which, of course, he was because he looked white, right? Looking white must be an oppressor, right? All right, you might say, hey, this is one-off. You have over 1 million teachers. There's going to be a rogue one that goes rogue. Just go to the school, fix it, right? No. School system defended the teacher who wanted to call her son an oppressor, or wanted him, actually, she wanted to make her son admit he was an oppressor. Worse, this was a school system that was a charter school system, paid for by your taxes, that was multi-state. It was based out of New York City, and they were in Nevada. We're talking a whole large, big school system that thinks this is good to teach. And they also obviously thought they won. They were not going to pay legal bills. And, well, unfortunately for Gabrielle Clark, she ran up $200,000 in legal bills fighting the school on this. Let's meet Gabrielle. Now, I hope you see some irony here already and how ridiculous some of this stuff is. Now, as to what happened subsequently, well, the school district, they tried dismissing the case, which is what lawyers do. And, they said there's no cause of action, but Supreme Court, or actually the court said, hey, sorry, this is clearly a case for illegal compulsory speech. You might be thinking, what's that? Though you might not remember the case name, you might remember the case from U.S. history, West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, where the Supreme Court said that you can't even force a kid to even salute a flag. And, and so actually saying something would be like the even worse, but you can't get them to salute the flag. And what's the Supreme Court's thinking? It's simple. Yes, what would your freedom of speech right mean if yes, you're free to say Y, but the government could also compel you to say, Z. It wouldn't mean a lot if the government can compel you to say, say what it wants you to say. And I think it's a very good ruling. And, if you're liberal, you definitely like that ruling. Well, in the end, the school district finally gave in. But, as we said, not before poor Gabrielle Clark had run up $200,000 in legal bill. I don't know about you, I don't have $200,000 usually just to blow on my son's school assignment. All right. Now, before also we go into the bills, I did want to cover one more thing, and that is this kind of false narrative the media presents. Mainly that CRT is not taught in schools. And their syllogism sort of goes like this. CRT is a very legalistic and complex body of thought. And if you read Kimberle Crenshaw's book, Critical Race Theory, this is all the classical CRT. It's pretty dense, and if you didn't have a law degree, it's not simple reading. I will agree with that statement can be true in certain contexts. And obviously, we don't teach legalistic, complex bodies of thought in schools, so hence, we do not teach CRT in schools, and any claims as such are false. And if you didn't quite catch it, there's a huge, huge, huge problem with the syllogism. Namely, well, actually, I'll give you an analogous syllogism, and maybe it'll be real obvious what's wrong with it. Okay, I'm going to read you some English. This is English from 670 AD. It's known as Cadman's hymn. Goes sort of like, Nushalan Helion, heaven reaches where Metwas Magda Unies Mulithon, where Wilder Father Sway, who Wunju West, Edrekten, or Unstalda. That is English. That is 100% correct that is English from 670 AD. We don't teach that in schools. Hence, claims that we teach English in schools are false. That is the same syllogism that the media is using on CRT is not taught in schools. Catching what's wrong here? Number one, CRT has evolved just like Old English. Where's there being disingenuous about it? Just like when I say English, obviously, I mean current modern day English. And if I mean Old English, I'll say it that way. Same with CRT. Media knows when people are talking about CRT, they're attacking kind of this woke-ish, neo-CRT that's what people are referring to. Not the old classical, Kimberle Crenshaw, she's like one of the founders of CRT, her and Dave Bell. Not this CRT. This is not what people are attacking. And, to sit there and say that, they're just playing a word game rather than kind of addressing what's really going on. Now, you could argue, hey, well, that, it is really bad, that's not CRT, but, and I would have gone into this more in depth if I was going to do a video on CRT and the CRT legislation, but it got way too long. And if you're interested in the CRT video, let me know in the notes. But current day CRT is 100% compatible with the classic CRT, postmodernist principles that you get from Kimberle Crenshaw and Derek Bell, the Big Red Book. And even more importantly, people, this classic CRT authors, they might cringe at some of the things that are being taught, but they haven't distanced themselves from the newer CRT movement. And more importantly, people like Kimberle Crenshaw have said they were targeting schools. Obviously, she, the founder of the original classic CRT movement, saw CRT as something broader than the legalistic foundations that she produced. That's important. Right there. She said she was targeting schools. So, you can't sit there and say it's, and actually just proves that the CRT is broader than the original, CRT foundation. All right, and then finally, the NEA said they would advocate CRT. So just get away from this narrative that CRT isn't taught. It's like the Michigan governor. I mean, she's another one of those who just completely misrepresented what the anti-CRT people are pushing. And we're going to see that in a second in form of legislation. Now, if you just want to see quickly, and I go into this more if this is a CRT course, but what is CRT? Well, it's part of postmodernism, and by definition, understand postmodernism is anti-liberal, anti-West. So if you're a liberal and you're for CRT, you have a kind of a cognitive dissonance there, believing in two different, incompatible things. And you might think, and if you just look at this quickly, there's the critical theories. If you ever want to read up on those, read Helen Pluckrose's book, Cynical Theories. She goes into all of them. It's actually very good if you want to, the branches of feminism to, the post-colonial theory, critical legal studies, and of course, critical race theory. Now, the important point is this is all part of postmodernism. It's anti-liberal, and you might think, well, no, he's just kind of using that to bash it. But let's just read from critical race theory, Delgado. This is a very, little more consumable book than Kimberle Crenshaw's book by Delgado and Gene Stefancic. And in his intro, he pretty much of what is race theory, and he mentions critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism. They are attacking rationalism. And the whole thing, I think the one common thread of postmodernism is the rejection of the primacy of reason. So they're basically saying we don't even have to have valid reasoning. It's kind of hard to argue with somebody like that. And they reject neutral principles of constitutional law. Not my words. These are key CRT scholars. More in the classical CRT, but like we said, the current day CRT is not really. It's just more of a specific implementation, as I kind of show here. It's not like that divergent. All right, but a lot of this, what you call it, is irrelevant. What we should be looking at is, what does the legislation do? Is it overly broad? Is it necessary? So let's take a look. Now, we're going to cover the legislation of Florida, Wisconsin, and Texas, mostly in parallel, but I will, since I'm from Wisconsin, and I'm in Wisconsin right now, we're going to stick to reading Wisconsin's proposed legislation, which was vetoed by our governor. And as we go through these, ask yourself, who would be against this legislation? And, is it overly broad, or is it pretty much, something that everybody would agree with? And just as a quick preface, as we go into this, you always have to add, and I'll provide the preface. These are prohibited teachings, so we can intro everything as, you cannot teach that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. Now, so let's think about that really quick. I guess that would prohibit teaching that whites are superior to blacks. Okay, that don't want people teaching that, so that doesn't seem like a big deal. And it prohibits teaching that men are superior to women, and vice versa. Who would be against this? Who's seeking to teach that one race is superior to another? Well, let's think about that. Let's ponder that. Who could be against this? Ku Klux Klan? I guess they'd be against this legislation, wouldn't they? Nazi and other hate groups? Certainly they'd be against this legislation. But unfortunately also, our beloved Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers and the pro-CRT lobby. they have fought this tooth and nail, saying this legislation is like all bad. And we're going to keep going. Let's see. Maybe there's some redeeming characteristics to reject this legislation. Let's see. Prohibited teaching number 2. You cannot teach that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. Now, this would clearly prohibit the actions in the Gabrielle Clark case. Now, I'd ask who can disagree, but obviously, certainly the school system disagreed with that. And, the only way to combat that is, everybody has to keep paying $200,000 in legal bills, or if there's a statute out there, they get protection. So Texas and Florida, they pass their statute, so they have those protections from some unscrupulous school system. But, this is just blatantly racist. Teaching that somebody is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, that's being racist, sexist, and sexist to do so. All right, sorry. And prohibited teaching number 3, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment because of the individual's race or sex. And this is basically, again, making it say you can't teach racism and sexism, and this is clearly, it embraces the legislation, Martin Luther King's colorblind ideal. But don't say the colorblind to progressive left. I mean, they completely mischaracterize it, saying it means that you see everybody's equal in outcome as well as under the law. But no, that's not what a colorblind ideal means. It means specifically, you don't judge somebody by the color of their skin. You judge them, as Martin Luther King wanted, you judge them by their merits, what they do, the individual. You never prejudge somebody by the color of their skin. And this is the important point. CRT people do not follow Martin Luther King's ideals at all. And now, do they ever attack him? It's like, no, just like Republicans are too scared to ever attack Trump, even if they totally disagree with him. They dance around that. If you ever read the books, they kind of have to look the other way because their ideals clearly are in contrast to Martin Luther King's colorblind ideals. All right. Prohibited teaching number 5, 4, I don't know. Individuals of one race or sex are not able to and should not attempt to treat others without respect to race or sex. Okay. This subsection is like just a really verbose way of saying that you can't teach that people are incapable of being colorblind or acting in a colorblind fashion. And to me, that's like, a victim mentality. You want to guarantee, well, I have to be, because if all whites are always unable to be colorblind, then I'm always a victim. That's what the whole CRT pushes. At least some of them. An individual's moral character is necessarily determined by the individual's race or sex. Okay, again, it prohibits teaching racism and sexism. Who can disagree? You get frustrated when you read this. It's like, it sounds like you have to say this. They're saying the same thing, and it's like, where's the bad stuff? Where's the bad stuff in this legislation? Ask yourself. All right, an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, bears responsibility for acts committed in the past by other individuals of the same race or sex. All right, this prohibits the actions in Gabrielle Clark case, and if you were to include like ethnicity or something, just to give you an example of what this is saying, it's basically saying you can't make an Arab student feel responsible for the terrorist acts of Muslims. You can't make a black person feel responsible for the acts of black criminals and white criminals. It's and that's pretty much one of the Western ideals, which the CRT does not like. They want you to grade not on the individual, on the color of your skin. And we'll come across that a little more in a second. Yes, this mentality does exist. Some people don't even know it exists, and it's mind-boggling. that it does. All right, prohibited teaching, I think we're at like number 9 or 10. An individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any form of psychological distress because of the individual's race or sex. Oh my God. This is the most galling section, or the most misrepresented section of the statute, or bill in Wisconsin's case, because it never was passed. This does not prohibit teaching topics that might make a white person feel bad, as the AP reported. That's not what the text says. That's not what was intended, and no judge would interpret it that way. Just go back and read it. An individual should feel, you can't teach that an individual should feel discomfort, whatever, because of the individual's race or sex. It's basically saying, hey, you can't tell an Arabic student that he should feel bad due to other Arab terrorist acts. There's nothing that says, you can't teach a subject if somebody might feel bad. That's not what it says, that qualifier. You can't make them feel bad because of the individual's race or sex, period. You can't make them feel bad for being the race they are or the sex they are. And worse, when you look at this, that was how the AP reported. Makes it illegal to make a white student feel bad. Where do you see white in this? Do you see anything that says white? No. This would be, what they did is like pretend you had a law that says, oh, okay, we're going to close off the Fox River, make it illegal to take a boat down the Fox River. Fox River's right behind me, pretty much. And then AP turned around and reports, Wisconsin made it illegal for black people to take a boat down the river. It's like, wait, no. It applies to whites and blacks. Why would you pull out one race? Because you wanted to slant the news. And I thought AP was a little more factual than some of the other media outlets. But no, that was one of the most dishonest pieces of journalism I have seen in so long, and worse, it was just repeated by CNN, and all the other news outlets, and all they had to do was just go back and read the legislation. I'm sorry, it just really galls me. I don't like people that have to skew the truth. I'd rather have some kind of news outlet I could trust, and certainly it ain't any of those that repeated this crap. All right. Now, this is an interesting one. And it's systems. You prohibit from teaching that systems based on meritocracy or traits such as hard work ethic are racist or sexist or created by individuals of a particular race to oppress individuals of another race. This is attacking a real doctrine being taught in places. Just look up quote-unquote whiteness. If you do, click on images, you'll probably see this one. This is a Smithsonian exhibit of whiteness and white culture. And it outlines a lot of those evil or traits of whites, such as objective, rational, linear thinking, promptness, planning for the future, delayed gratification, working hard. How disturbing is this? Let me count the ways. Okay, it's blatantly racist. Okay, now aside from the fact that you're treating whites as this monolithic, group, as if all whites are prompt. Yeah, right. But read this another way. If this is white characteristics, and it distinguishing white characteristics, meaning distinguishes whites from non-white culture, you're basically saying non-whites have the opposite. Non-white culture would involve not being prompt, irrational thinking, and laziness. How racist can you be? You look at this, and if you didn't know better, you might think the Ku Klux Klan came up with this exhibit. But no, it's the left, progressive left. These are the CRT. This is the kind of CRT that people are fighting. And specifically, this is exactly what the legislation is targeting. If you notice, this is the last piece of meat in that legislation. And, and let's just also, as we just said, implicitly, white is bad. And you might even look at this and saying, well, are you sure? But always ask yourself, when I say that is, are you sure you should interpret that way? Ask yourself, if you were in the inner city, asked a kid, being called an Oreo, or, if they're accused of acting white, ask them, is that a compliment from their peers? No. Acting white, Oreo, those are not compliments. And you might be wondering, wait, how do they get this? Where's this coming from? Two things. Postmodernism and what Nietzsche said in Genealogy of Morals. And this is 100% on point. In Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche, he discussed it as, master-slave morality. I think we call the slave morality today this victim morality. I mean, his was over 100 years ago. He wrote that. But we'll just call it the have and have-nots morality. And it goes like this. The downtrodden one, the have-not, he looks up at the more successful person. And they might see that the more successful person works or studies a lot harder than they do. That they see that the person is a good saver, more level-headed, maybe prompt, and whatever. Now, they could try emulating those characteristics to be more successful. Certainly I do when I try to figure out, okay, what makes people successful? But for a lot of people, well, that requires too much. What's another alternative way to deal with the fact if you're on the bottom and you see, oh, those people working a lot, I don't like that. You just change your worldview. You give yourself a worldview that comports with your actions, meaning you'll decide, hey, working hard, that's bad. Planning for the future, that's bad. Being prompt, that's bad. Good self-composure, that's bad. That's exactly what this is. And you also have to, take in, postmodernism. The whole postmodern critical race theory, like they said, rejection of, Western, classic liberalism. They question, is hard work really good? They're questioning the very foundations of, they ignore the fact that these are probably more characteristic of successful people and not whites. But, they question this. They'll ask, is hard work right? Is anything correct? It's always good to ask, but then they kind of brush aside the obvious conclusions that, no, these are not white characteristics by any means. They are generally successful people's characteristics. Not all of them. I don't even agree with, I don't think that all these are good or bad, but when you sit there and start attacking promptness and rational thinking, you're on thin ice. All right. Now, just quick, sorry, we're very close to the end. I just want to pick out a few things that were somewhat meaty. That was the meat of all the legislation. I mean, I don't know if anything really you thought was terrible, but there's a few things that were like here was only in the Wisconsin statute. And they mentioned, hey, you can't send a teacher to training that's going to push this same indoctrination. And yes, this indoctrination does exist for teachers and others. And if you don't believe me, read Robin DiAngelo's book. Okay, White Fragility. Actually, don't read it. I think John McWhorter, a left-leaning black who wrote Woke Racism. He's a traditional liberal black. He thought white fragility was very condescending to blacks. And so let me just quickly summarize it, maybe a little simplistically, but Robin DiAngelo's book sort of goes like this. She's a corporate trainer in real life, and she describes her, her sessions, including where she basically goes to the companies, accuses all the whites of being racist, and then, of course, they deny it, and then she just mentions, well, you're just not consciously racist. And then they get defensive, and then she just uses it, aha, that proves they're racist. Okay, maybe a little simplistic, but she makes the main mistake over and over in that entire book. No, it's not all about race. If you did those, and this is like basic HR, if you ever took a business class, HR business class, when you push, people push back. And she basically, is accusing people. And they'd have, yes, if you get, in the same way you accuse them of being a thief and pedophile and insisting they're a pedophile or thief, yes, they're going to get defensive. It has nothing to do with racism. And, it's really disconcerting that something could be sold so much and it's just a piece of crap based on just false premises. Instead, read John McWhorter's book, Woke Racism. He discusses a lot of it. All right, other section, Florida statute. It says, this important thing says, paragraph A may not be construed to prohibit discussion of the concepts listed therein as part of a course or training, provided such training is given in an objective manner without endorsement of the concepts. So basically it says, hey, you can teach everything we just said you can't teach as true. You just can't teach it as true. I mean, you can't teach that whites are superior, but you can talk about whites, some people believing whites are superior. You can teach that this body of thought exists. And even the other sorted portions, you can teach that, those mindsets exist. So it's mind-boggling that somehow somebody interpreted any of this to mean you can't teach history or any parts of history. There's just nothing to support that. And have we covered anything? I don't think so. That even touches on that. And this is just a restatement of that same principle in the Florida statute. And one more thing the Wisconsin statute had, which definitely doomed it, because we have it basically requires that school boards provide a transparency to their curriculum. I mean, they have to post what is the curriculum they're teaching kids. Transparency. Who would be against transparency of what's being taught in schools? Well, of course, the NEA. And they donate a lot to the Democratic Party. And a culture that was also in vogue to be anti-CRT, pro-CRT, the Democratic Party. So, Governor Tony Evers, vetoed it. And I'm sure this is one key thing that killed it. When they sat there say you have to be transparent in your curriculum. Because, let's face it, every single thing we've just covered, only sorted minds would disagree with. So final thoughts. Yes, the modern day implementation of CRT is real and being taught in schools. Otherwise, the NEA wouldn't have advocated incorporating it into K through 12. The Gabrielle Clark case would never have existed. And one thing I just haven't said outright is this stuff shouldn't be taught in the schools as truth in the same way you wouldn't teach any religion in school as truth. I mean, our friend Mr. McWhorter, woke racism again, he called wokeness a religion. It has this creation myth, 1619, its original sin, being born white, and they have their clergy that, burns heretics at the stake of cancel culture. But in the same way you don't teach religion, you don't teach wokeism, you don't teach this stuff. All right, now, teaching this stuff just drives people to the polar opposite extremes. If teachers started surreptitiously teaching religion in schools, it would drive some otherwise neutral people to the left. You teach this woke CRT stuff, and you drive the same people to the right. So if you're looking for Republican wins, keep advocating, CRT. You'll get more and more. You'll just scare more people to the right. And unfortunately, the media has repeatedly mischaracterized the anti-CRT lobby and the anti-CRT legislation. They keep saying it's an attempt by people to censor history, but we've clearly seen there's just no basis for that in the legislation. And hello, CNN, you realize by misrepresenting this stuff, people, maybe not in this one, they'll find out on other things, and it just drives people to other news outlets. They wonder why people don't listen to them. Well, and why people watch Fox News and so biased. Well, the way you've mischaracterized CRT, you have no moral leg to stand on. Thank you, CNN. All right, thank you. This is Alexander Collins, and thank you for your time. And if you're interested in a more complete video on CRT and its origins, let me know in the comments. Thank you.